Hi, this is Vicki with Learning Home Volunteers, and welcome to our learning session on shapes. Learning shapes helps children identify and organize visual information, and it is one of the beginning learning experiences which will help children understand symbols and signs. And like colors, there's such a very big range of sizes of shapes and orientations, and it certainly is difficult to recognize that this circle is the same as another circle. And then when you add the different shapes compared to each other, you begin to understand what kinds of attributes make a square and not a rectangle. And then also understanding the pattern recognition will help fine tune those shape recognitions. The last reason is that shape recognitions helps a lot with letter recognitions. We can even describe letters using shapes. You know, the letter O is like a circle, and the letter V is like a triangle missing one of the sides. And as a reminder, the school wants you to be able to recognize a circle, a triangle, a square, and a line. So we're happy to excited, well, actually excited and happy to introduce you to the materials that will provide a lot of different ways to explore shapes. And as always, books help us kind of work through that. And we have three books for this session. Our first one is a book about seeing shapes in existing items, and it's titled Shape Up Construction Trucks. I love that these common vehicles, we can find all of the primary shapes. And I hope its contents inspire your family to search in your own environment for shapes. Our next book, Round is a Tortilla, is written by Roseanne Thong, a writer who's made her living teaching English as a second language in Guatemala, Vietnam, and Hong Kong. She lives in Southern California, and this book helps us find shapes in a Latinx home in the community. The next book is, well, about Triangle and his friend, the Square, and the tricks that they play on each other. I hope you will sit with your child through these videos. Each of them brings a little bit more depth in the shape learning for your child. Let's get to our first activity, which I think is spectacular. And although was quite a big effort for the volunteers to put together, it's magical. Mirrors actually provide the opportunity to explore symmetry, reflection, perspective, angles, our own movements, and self awareness. When they're used to explore shapes, we begin to see that shapes can create shapes through the mirror. Like in this example, we put triangles only in the mirror, but when we see them reflected, all of a sudden we see a diamond, a hexagon, and unconventional eight-sided figures, which is pretty amazing. I think that the thing that most children notice when they begin to play with a mirror box is just simply the reflection itself. In our first image, we see a reflection of a dupla train that shows the opposite side of the train. Even though I'm looking at the numbers from this side, the mirror reflects what's going on the other side. And in our second image, we can see what is behind us as we look at ourselves. So I'm looking forward, but I see what's behind me, which is kind of weird. So when we touch our face or our nose or eyes, it always happens in reverse. And when we touch our face, looking at one of those mirrors, we can see that when we tilt the mirror in a different angle, different things happen. It looks like our face is organized in a different way. Or when we look down on a mirror, like a third image, we can see what's above us. By touching the mirror gives a different version of that. And I think this reflection exploration is really, really fun. So even though all the mirrors that we have are set up at a 90-degree stuff, feel free to flatten it out, to look up or down and behind us. Another way to explore using a mirror box is to explore symmetry. And with the corner of the mirror box directly in front of the child, we can see what happens when they put in a symmetrical pattern. It gets replicated in the panes of the mirror. So in this first picture here, we see four copies of the pattern that the child has made. And in the second object, we see even letters get reflected in reverse. Or in this case, the last one, we see symmetrical patterns on the ground by using a line in the same image on the left or the right. You know, symmetry occurs in nature all the time. And here we have a shell that's actually connected in the middle, which we could see actually generates the same image on one side as the other, just in nature by making the left side of the shell the same as the right side. Butterflies are really another really good example of symmetry in nature. You can see in this butterfly that the markings on the wings have are the same on the left as they are on the right. And flowers, many times, if you look at a central circle, the middle, if you draw an imaginary line through the middle of it, you'll see the same number and placement of the petals on the left as you do the right. And many animals are symmetrical, as we can see in this antelope. And you can actually use a mirror to draw the other half of things like a leaf by drawing on one side and making the same thing on the other. And even snowflakes are symmetrical. Whatever your child decides to explore in the mirror box, it will create magical images for them to experiment with. We hope your child really enjoys the mirror box itself. Our next activity, number 2, is creating shapes with shapes using tanagrams. We, we have provided a print set of, or a plastic set of different shapes that will match the shapes of the stuff. And at the most basic level of the interaction with the sheet, you can just fill in the shapes that actually fit. But this, we have also provided a printed set of a blank sheet where you could actually use those just on in your teacher's kit to create using those shapes to make whatever patterns that you're interested in making, which is really kind of cool. You know, you could see here we have these triangles that are of different shapes and colors, and you can create symmetry with all of those, which is really kind of delightful. To kind of build on that idea, we have another activity called a geoboard. A geoboard is used in school as they begin to explore shapes in more detail. And your geoboards have two sides. One, I think, is just a square, and sometimes they have on some of them have a circle, but the one we're going to be using is the square one. So it has task cards that are associated with it. And you can use the rubber bands to actually make those things using the actual task cards and rubber bands to make those things happen. You may notice that the shape that they're maybe making is square, but doesn't take up the same number of places that's shown on the tag. Don't stress, they're exploring. In fact, they should be able to make any 2D representation of a shape and replicate it in a 3D as a way. And as they become more proficient, their fingers will become stronger, so they'll be able to make some of these big stretches of the rubber bands themselves to make whatever they need. You can just simply start by making shapes and asking the right kinds of questions to help your child engage in thinking about shapes. For example, you might say, you know, a triangle needs to be attached to 3 of those points. Can you put your rubber band on 3 pegs? And what shape do you see? And exploring those relationships between the pegs and sides will help you cover the basic facts about shapes themselves. So included with the geoboards are those task cards. You could make a fish or a heart or letters or numbers. Honestly, there's an endless set of things that you could make with the geoboards. And as they become more proficient in understanding letters and numbers or even other shapes, they'll be can come back to this geoboard over and over again. So make sure to keep rubber bands in the geoboards. I think you'll find as your child ages that this will be something that they'll continue to want to explore. Finally, we have our last activity of the week. This is Shapes Around Me, and you'll find a printable numbered 4. This is what the sheet looks like, and I think there are 2 things I would be thinking about as we look for this particular shape. One is, I'm looking for a shape that looks like this, and there will be multiple squares on the sheet. You can have them make an X through it as they find it, and then ask for different kinds of shape. Well, that's all for this week. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for joining us on this exciting exploration of shapes.